Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us here at mobTV.my. I'm Jahabadi Muhammad Yunus, your host for Let's Talk. As we are aware, who is more Malay or more Islamic has become a permanent feature and major preoccupation with UMNO, PAS and now PKR politicians. There are bigger questions that we may ask. Should Malaysians even consider having more Islamic laws? Are not the existing laws, including Contracts Act, Penal Code, Road Transport Act, Islamic law, are they not enough? Are they not Islamic? However, every time an election is looming in Malaysia, Hudud laws take central political stage. It becomes so highly politicized. In the process, Malaysians, both Muslims and non-Muslims, become utterly confused. But Hudud law is not a political issue. It is a legal issue, an Islamic law issue. We have with us here today an internationally renowned Islamic scholar who has authored numerous books on Islamic jurisprudence and Islamic law. He is now the chairman and CEO of the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you.
Professor, I have here with me a book that you've written about 12 years ago,
Right.
discussing Islamic law in Malaysia, issues and development. And in this book, you have covered comprehensively entire topic, a chapter on Hudud laws.
Right.
For the benefit of the viewers, what really are Hudud laws?
Hudud laws are laws that are specified in the Quran or Sunnah, particularly a number of crimes for which the punishment is specifically determined in the Quran or sometimes in the Sunnah, although the Quran commands the highest authority in respect of determining a severe punishment like we are looking at in Hudud.
Okay. What is the real objective of Hudud laws? Because we're interested to find out whether this particular objective, can it only be achieved if the Hudud laws are implemented into the laws of the land?
Well, the objective of any criminal law is to administer justice, to establish justice. Crime prevention is, of course, the other objective of penalties. Is it necessary to implement the hudud through the modality of statutory legislation? That is up to the ruling authorities. There is a doctrine of siyasa sharia, of public law doctrine in Islam. The ruler is authorized, especially in matters of crimes and punishment, to determine the best ways in which crime may be prevented and punishments are administered, and ultimately the best way that justice and good governance can be established.
Very interesting when Professor speaks about siyasa sharia.
Right.
Professor suggesting that the ruler or the government has a discretion to choose which is the best way possible to prevent crimes. Now that seems to go against the general perception that Hudud law is something that it must be implemented, especially if it's a Muslim society.
Right.
The perception is that it is incumbent upon any Muslim society to implement the Hudud laws.
Yes,
What is the
implementation of the hudud is a requirement of Sharia, but how they are implemented the best way. There are different ways of implementing the hudud. Either the hudud for the sake of hudud in a literalist sense, or in a way that would serve the objectives of justice. Now, this is for the government, for the ruling authority to find the best way. If legislation, bylaws, in policy documents, or other measures would serve the best way of implementation of hudud, there is an element of discretion. The basic mandate that crime must be punished, justice must be established in the hudud are a small number of predetermined punishments in the Quran. That is a part of it. That is.
So if I may interject, that means there are two conflicting interests, if you like. One is implementing hudud just for the sake of hudud.
Right.
And the other, more important one, is in achieving the goal of justice, the goal of crime prevention, which should actually supersede the other one of just merely implementing the hudud for the sake of form.
I am critical of the way that hudud are presented to the general public in Malaysia. Hudud are highly politicized, you earlier mentioned rightly so. And it become a matter of party politics. Instead of really presenting them in a way that the people will understand the hudud. The hudud are, by their name, they are very limited, specified punishments, in the procedure for that is carefully determined in the Sharia, in the fiqh. Some of these punishments, for example, are really meant to establish the standard, the optimal moral objective of society. For example, the punishment of zina, which is determined in the Quran at 100 lashes, requires for its proof 4 eyewitnesses.
Yes.
4 eyewitnesses is almost, it's very difficult to find unless someone commits the offense in the marketplace. It would appear from the from this specification of the Quran that implementation of the hudud is not the first priority. Hudud are the upper limits. We keep them, but we apply them. Perhaps there are other categories of ta'zir and discretionary punishments that in situations where all the necessary conditions for hudud cannot be fulfilled, then they are lowered 1 degree down to the level of ta'zir. And I think that the laws that you have in Malaysia, as you mentioned, penal code and other, they can be classified as ta'zir.
In other words, if we were to look at the Islamic objective, if I may say that, in terms of what Professor mentioned, Siyasat Sharia,
right,
the ultimate aim is if I'm correct, the principle of justice rather than the form of justice. For example, Professor mentioned that if you were to look at the penal code, you have various kinds of crimes which are made an offense. Theft, for example, you have CBT, for example, various categories of crime.
Right.
So is Professor saying that these crimes, if they are consistent with the Islamic principles of justice, then they can be categorized under ta'zir? Is that what Professor is saying?
Yes, I think ta'zir is an open category, and the laws that you are mentioning, the Parliament of Malaysia and the authorities have determined those laws, and they have passed their proper procedures, and this is within the authority of the ulul amr, but those who are in charge of the affairs. The laws of Malaysia are within the realm of Siyasat Sharia.
But wouldn't the counter-argument be that this penal code, for example, or even if we take the Contracts Act, for instance,
right,
now the penal code is not a product of the Islamic jurists.
Right.
It is a product of so-called civil system, the parliament.
Right.
Now my question would be this, must a law be Islamic only if it comes from an Islamic jurist, or is it enough that the law is consistent with the Islamic principles in the Quran, in the Sunnah?
Yes, there is no such requirement that every law must arise from the text. Throughout the history of Islam, Islamic governance, in all periods of time, the rulers, governors, the caliphs and sultans, they have issued ordinances, policy documents and laws, provided that the objective, a valid objective, that is establishing good government, establishing justice, any measure that is taken toward that purpose, that falls within the objectives of Sharia and of Islam itself. This is in fact what Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya wrote in his famous book Al-Siyasa al-Shar'iyya, that the ultimate goal of all laws is to establish justice, to realize the welfare of people, to remove them from corruption and harm. Any way, any procedure that leads to these purposes, realize these objectives, they are part of Islam and part of the Sharia.
So Hudud and Islamic law is not really so concerned with the form rather than the substance of justice itself.
If you tell me that you apply the Hudud in a way that is manifestly unjust, I would not apply it. I would try to find a way that I can fight the crime, establish justice. If the realities of society are such, and we can find example in times of military engagement, for example, during the time of the Prophet and the Khulafa, the Hudud were suspended.
Very interesting.
There were,
very interesting.
Yes. The reason for that was that there were reports, for example, that some of the soldiers were drinking wine, and should they be punished? And the answer to this was that it is a greater harm to Islam that a soldier defects to the other side rather than just implementing a punishment.
Viewers, we will go for a short break now. We'll come back with more interesting discussion soon.
Hai, jangan lupa subscribe
mobTV Best.
Tonton
mobTV
Best.
Tonton mobTV Best.
Watch mobTV
The best.
Yes.
Hi, welcome again to Let's Talk with me, Jahabuddin Muhammad Yunus. Here with me in the studio is the Chairman and CEO of International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali. Back to the discussion on Hudud law, Professor. Before the break, Professor mentioned something very interesting, the aspect of repentance and forgiveness.
Right.
Now, we notice that whenever there's a discussion on Hudud by the politicians, they seem to ignore completely the aspect of repentance and forgiveness until the general public seems to think that Hudud is very cruel, very harsh. Right. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, indeed. This is an important aspect of the Hudud in the Quran itself. I wrote a book entitled Punishment in Islamic Law, an Inquiry into the Hudud Bill of Kelantan. It was published in 1994. And I have looked into the Hudud Bill of Kelantan. It does not quite match with the reading of the Quran on this subject of repentance. Look at the Quranic verses. There are 4 or 5 verses on the subject of Hudud. And the Quran specifies the offense and the punishment, and immediately or in the same context then say that if the offender repents and corrects himself, then Allah is forgiving, listens to people, repentance. Now this is a typical feature of the Quranic verses on hudud. Look at everyone, and this is something that is a part of the text. Now I ask the question, what happened to this aspect of the Quran? We have read through our history of jurisprudence, the hudud has come down to us as fixed in mandatory punishments. But if you take a holistic look at the reading of the Quran, there is room for repentance, correction, and forgiveness. That has not been integrated into the laws of the hudud. The laws tell you as soon as the offense is proven, the judge has no discretion but to implement and enforce it. This is not the way that I see the Quran.
Now, this is where there's been a major misconception.
Right.
For example, you have Muslims even and non-Muslims who come up to me and say that if you compare with the civil law, for instance, say we take the example of theft in the civil law penal code.
Right.
Now there's a maximum punishment and there's a minimum punishment, including even a discretion for the judge to bound over the person who steals, for instance, if he's a first offender or is a young offender. But based on what Professor is saying that that kind of principle and concept is already incorporated in the Quran, where there is a forgiveness on one level and then there's a harshest punishment on the other, the severe punishment.
Right.
So is it the Professor's view that in the Quran, Allah also gives us various discretionary punishments according to the situation of the offender? Is that the position?
The had means the upper limit.
Upper limit.
The upper limit. Below that, there is the level of ta'zir. If we are in a position that all the necessary requirements of a had are fulfilled, and the standard of proof is that it is proven beyond any element of doubt, then the had applies.
Yes.
But the conditions are so difficult to fulfill that in most cases it would be reduced to the level of ta'zir. And that means effectively what you are saying, that there are grades. The upper limit is the had, below that there is a flexible range.
The aim being justice and...
That's right. And the judge here in ta'zir has discretion, look at the conditions of the offender, the surrounding circumstances, and determine a punishment that is good to deter the person from repeating that offense.
There's another confusion, Professor. Maybe you can clarify this. My reading of the Quran tells me that there are only 4 specific offences mentioned in the Quran, and you mentioned the same thing in your book, both this book also.
Right.
Where you written about justice and equality, and also the other book which I showed earlier.
Right.
Now, why is it that in juristic discussions I noticed they keep expanding it from the 4 in the Quran by including 2 more, if I'm not mistaken?
2 more, yes. In fact, of those 4 in the Quran, one of it is doubtful whether it is a had for wine drinking. The Quran specifies the offense, but does not determine punishment.
And the 4 is what?
Theft, adultery, and slanderous accusation,
and hiraba.
And then wine drinking. For wine drinking, إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنْصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. Gambling and wine drinking, they are dirty work of the devil. Avoid it. But there is no punishment. Now, if you are accurate in understanding the hudud, wine drinking does not qualify.
As hudud law.
As hudud law.
Yes.
But jurisprudence has included it. On the analysis that during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, 40 lashes were specified, and later that is something like siyasa shar'iyya.
Yes.
It is not a part
But
of
still,
the text.
it should not be hudud.
It is not a hudud. It is a tazir offense.
What about apostasy, Professor?
Apostasy
Is
is
it hudud?
also not a had punishment. Now there is a huge debate about apostasy, but if you read the Quran, there are about 20 or 21 references to apostasy in different